$100,000 hit the silver tray with a sharp, metallic slap. Not slid, not offered. Thrown. Victor Harrington's voice cut through the sovereign room like a blade. "I'll give you 100 grand if you serve me in Chinese." Conversations died mid-sentence. Forks froze in the air. Green bills lay scattered like deliberate insults, and every pair of elite Manhattan eyes turned to the same place. Naomi Carter, a black waitress, standing perfectly still at the center of the room. This wasn't generosity. It wasn't a bet. It was power on display. A millionaire proving he could buy humiliation the same way he bought wine and silence. The room felt smaller, colder, as if the walls themselves were watching. If you've ever witnessed the arrogance of money looking down on human dignity, make sure you subscribe now, because what happens next will turn this moment of public shame into something no one in that room was prepared for. Victor Harrington didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He leaned back in his Italian leather chair with the lazy confidence of a man who had never been told no, letting the moment stretch just long enough to make it hurt. His fingers tapped the table once, slow and deliberate, as if he were conducting the room itself. The three Asian investors beside him shifted in their seats, their smiles tight, rehearsed, unsure whether they were guests or witnesses to something they hadn't agreed to see. Victor gestured toward them casually, as though pointing out art on the wall. He spoke about deals, influence, how real power worked in New York. He talked as if the city belonged to him, as if people were pieces he could move for entertainment between courses. His words slid effortlessly into contempt. He joked about accents, about backgrounds, about who belonged at the table, and who only existed to serve it. Each sentence landed like a soft laugh wrapped around a blade, sharp enough to cut but polished enough to sound respectable. A few people chuckled, the kind of laughter that comes from fear, not amusement. Others stared down at their plates, suddenly fascinated by food they hadn't touched. No one intervened. No one spoke up. The sovereign room had transformed into a modern arena, elegant and cruel, where humiliation was the evening's unlisted special. Victor's eyes returned to Naomi Carter, lingering on her uniform, her posture, her stillness. To him, she wasn't a person. She was a symbol, a prop, a convenient target. A black waitress standing under crystal lights while a millionaire demonstrated dominance in front of potential partners. He smiled, not wide, not loud, but sharp. The smile of a predator who knows the room will let him finish the hunt. He made assumptions out loud, about her education, her intelligence, her limits, each one heavier than the last, stacking them carefully, building a cage with words. Naomi didn't flinch. She didn't lower her eyes. She didn't speak. She stood, there with the silver tray balanced perfectly in her hands, breathing steady, face unreadable. Her silence wasn't weakness, it was restraint. Around her, the air felt thick, as if time itself had slowed to watch what she would do. The humiliation had been staged with precision, every detail designed to strip her down in front of strangers. And still, she gave Victor nothing, no reaction, no defense, just presence. In a room full of money, voices, and power plays, the most unsettling thing was the woman who refused to perform on command. The money sat there, bright and unreal, scattered across the silver tray like something out of another life. $100,000. Naomi Carter didn't need to count it. She felt its weight instantly, not in her hands, but in her chest. That number translated itself inside her mind with brutal clarity. Hospital rooms that smelled like antiseptic and fear. Late-night phone calls from doctors speaking in careful, apologetic tones. Bills stacked on the kitchen table, unopened because opening them felt like admitting defeat. That money could mean another surgery, another round of treatment. Time. Time her mother desperately needed. It could mean escape, not luxury, not excess, just breathing room. A chance to stop calculating every grocery trip, every subway ride, every hour of sleep sacrificed for another shift. It represented 3 years of survival lived on the edge of exhaustion. 3 years of cramped apartments, shared walls, alarms ringing before sunrise. 3 years of carrying trays at night and holding hands in clinic hallways during the day. 3 years of swallowing pride because pride didn't pay medical bills. $100,000 could close the distance between drowning and staying afloat. For a split second, the room faded. The laughter, the stares, Victor Harrington's voice dripping with amusement, all blurred into the background. Naomi saw only her mother's face, tired but smiling, pretending not to notice how much her daughter had given up. She felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the one that came from knowing exactly how fragile everything was. Standing there, silent, she understood why most people would have taken the money and endured the shame. Survival has a way of reshaping what feels acceptable. But Naomi also understood something Victor never would. This wasn't an offer, it was a leash. The money wasn't meant to help her, it was meant to own her, to force gratitude where none was deserved, to turn her need into a spectacle. If she took it on his terms, she wouldn't just be accepting cash. She would be agreeing to disappear inside his narrative, to become the obedient figure he could point to and say, "This is how power works." And that was a price far higher than $100,000. So she stayed where she was. Not because the money meant nothing, but because it meant everything. She stood there because she knew the difference between being helped and being controlled. Because she had already lost too much to hand over the last thing she still possessed, her dignity. As Victor's voice continued to echo through the room, Naomi's body remained in the sovereign room, but her mind slipped somewhere else entirely. The present dissolved, replaced by a life that felt almost fictional now. There was a time when people didn't look past her, didn't talk over her, didn't reduce her to a uniform. There was a time when her name carried weight. Dr. Naomi Carter, spoken with respect, written on conference programs, introduced behind podiums instead of tables. She had stood in lecture halls packed with students hanging on every word, explaining how language shaped thought, how meaning traveled through code and culture. 9 languages lived inside her with equal ease, each one a different doorway into the human mind. She wasn't just fluent, she was precise, a specialist in natural language processing, teaching machines to understand what people meant, not just what they said. Corporations flew her across continents. Universities competed for her time. She spoke on global stages about communication, diplomacy, and the invisible power of words. She belonged to a world that celebrated intellect, rigor, and excellence. Then came the phone call that split her life in two. Middle of the night, a number she didn't recognize. Her mother's voice never made it to the other end. A stroke, severe. The words were clinical, detached, but their impact was absolute. Naomi dropped everything. Lectures canceled, flights abandoned. Research paused with the naive belief it could simply be resumed later. She sat beside hospital beds listening to machines breathe for the woman who had raised her alone. Days blurred into nights, nights into weeks. The bills arrived quietly at first, then relentlessly. Insurance forms denied, procedures labeled experimental, care reclassified as optional. She sold her apartment, then her car, then the things that held memories. Books she had annotated by hand, jewelry passed down through generations. Objects that once symbolized stability vanished one by one, traded for time. She took a leave of absence, then another, until the space she occupied at the university was quietly filled by someone else. Emails went unanswered. Invitations stopped coming. Colleagues who once praised her brilliance avoided her discomfort. In academia, momentum is everything. When you fall behind, the system keeps moving without you. When her mother finally woke months later, she was alive but changed. Care was no longer temporary. It was permanent. The debt had grown beyond reason. Naomi filed for bankruptcy with hands that shook, not from fear, but from disbelief. The title doctor still belonged to her, but the world that had valued it had already turned its attention elsewhere. Standing in that restaurant now, wearing black instead of credentials, she carried the weight of everything she had lost. And no one in that room knew that the woman they were watching had once been the one everyone listened to. Victor Harrington wasn't satisfied. Power, once tasted, always demanded more. He leaned forward now, elbows on the table, voice sharpening as the room drew closer around him. The bet, he said, wasn't enough. It needed consequences, real ones. If she failed, she wouldn't just walk away embarrassed. She would kneel, right there on the marble floor. She would apologize to everyone in the restaurant for wasting their time. She would admit, out loud, that she was a fraud who had tried to deceive people far above her station. Each condition landed heavier than the last, turning the air thick and almost impossible to breathe. A low murmur rippled through the room, then died. Even the servers stopped moving. Some of the investors shifted uncomfortably, glancing at one another, silently questioning how far this had gone. But Victor pressed on, drunk on control. He framed it as a lesson, a demonstration of integrity. In his version of the world, humiliation was proof of honesty, and cruelty was just good business practice. He wanted witnesses. He wanted submission. He wanted to watch a confident woman break. Naomi listened without interrupting. Every word was clear, every threat unmistakable. The room waited for her to retreat, to shake her head, to choose dignity by walking away. That was the ending Victor expected. That was the ending everyone expected. Instead, something shifted. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Her posture straightened, her grip on the tray steadied. When she raised her eyes, the fear that had flickered there moments ago was gone, replaced by something far more dangerous. Resolve. "I accept," she said. The words cut through the silence like glass. Victor laughed, sharp and disbelieving, repeating the conditions as if she hadn't understood them, kneeling, apologizing, publicly admitting she was an imposter. Naomi didn't argue. She didn't negotiate. She simply confirmed it again. If she failed, she would do all of it. Around them, disbelief spread faster than sound. Some people stared at her with pity, others with fascination. No one could understand why she would step further into the trap. But Victor didn't see the change in her eyes. He didn't recognize the calm of someone who had already survived worse. He mistook her acceptance for desperation, never realizing that every cruel word he spoke was tightening the spring he was standing on. Naomi wasn't agreeing because she felt small. She was agreeing because she knew exactly who she was. If you believe that intelligence has no color and dignity has no price, comment "respect" right now. Victor turned to the table, arms open, announcing that they were about to witness the difference between confidence and delusion. What he didn't know was that the game had already slipped out of his control. The humiliation he had designed so carefully was no longer hers alone. And in that moment, as Naomi met his gaze without blinking, the room unknowingly crossed the point of no return. The menu arrived wrapped in dark leather, thick and heavy, the kind of object meant to intimidate before it was ever opened. Victor waved it in the air like a final verdict, his confidence swelling as he announced its origin, its complexity, its purpose. "This was the special Chinese menu," he said, "the one reserved for serious investors, filled with technical descriptions, regional terminology, words meant to expose imposters." He smiled as if the outcome were already decided, as if the room were simply waiting for the inevitable collapse. To him, this was theater, and he was certain he knew how it ended. Naomi accepted the menu with steady hands. From the outside, nothing changed. Her shoulders remained relaxed, her breathing slow. She didn't rush, she didn't hesitate. She opened the first page as calmly as if she were presenting a wine list to a regular guest. Around her, tension coiled tighter with every passing second. Victor mistook her composure for ignorance, the quiet before panic. He leaned back, satisfied, already preparing the next insult. Inside, Naomi was somewhere else entirely. The characters on the page didn't intimidate her. They felt familiar, almost comforting. They pulled her backward in time, across oceans, into narrow Beijing streets humming with scooters and voices. 6 months. That was how long she had lived there, immersed in language so deeply it invaded her dreams. She remembered the classrooms with chalk-dusted floors and the long wooden tables scarred by generations of students. She remembered her advisor, severe and unyielding, correcting her tones without mercy. Again, slower, wrong emphasis, start over. Excellence wasn't optional there. It was the baseline. She remembered the nights in a small apartment, windows cracked open to let in air thick with city noise, repeating phrases until her throat ached, crying quietly so her roommates wouldn't hear, as she struggled with subtleties no textbook could fully explain. Mandarin wasn't just words, it was history. Hierarchy, emotion encoded in pitch and rhythm. One wrong tone could shift meaning entirely, turning respect into insult, clarity into confusion. She had failed more times than she could count before she mastered it, and she had mastered it. Back in the sovereign room, Victor's voice faded into background noise. Naomi's eyes moved across the menu, recognizing regions, techniques, philosophies layered into each description. Sichuan heat, balanced with numbing spice. Northern precision, southern elegance. This wasn't random, this was her world, a subject she had defended in front of rooms far colder than this one, panels far less forgiving than a drunk millionaire playing emperor for an evening. She turned a page slowly, deliberately, letting the silence stretch, the calm before the storm. Victor chuckled. whispering to the table that there were a lot of characters, as if that alone were proof enough. Naomi almost smiled, not because she felt triumphant, but because she knew something no one else in that room did. The trap meant for her had been built on the assumption that she didn't belong here. And assumptions, she had learned, were the weakest foundation of all. The room expected Naomi to begin. That was the rhythm Victor had designed. Question, stumble, collapse. But instead, she closed the menu gently and looked up. Not at the money, not at the crowd, straight at him. The sudden pause felt deliberate, heavy, as if time itself had been asked to wait. Conversations that had already died now felt distant, irrelevant. Even Victor sensed it, though he didn't yet understand why his smile faltered. "There's something I'd like to clarify," Naomi said, her voice calm, measured, unhurried. Not defensive, not pleading, confident in a way that didn't ask permission. She spoke about integrity, about honesty, echoing Victor's own words back to him without raising her tone. Then she did something no one in that room anticipated. She raised the stakes. "If I don't just describe the dishes in Chinese," she said, "but explain their regional origins, preparation techniques, and cultural meaning, you double the bet, $200,000. The number landed with a dull thud. It wasn't shouted. It didn't need to be. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the clinking of glassware from other tables seemed to stop. Victor stared at her, searching her face for desperation, for bluff, for cracks. He found none. Around them, the investors shifted, their curiosity sharpening into something else. Interest, unease, possibility. Naomi didn't stop there. If she failed, she added, she wouldn't just kneel and apologize. She would work at the restaurant for free for an entire month. No pay, no complaint. The offer wasn't reckless. It was calculated. She had stripped the moment of spectacle and replaced it with balance. Risk for risk. Confidence for confidence. For the first time that evening, Victor hesitated. He laughed, but the sound was thinner now, forced. He repeated the terms slowly, as if hearing them again might restore his control. $200,000 if she succeeded. A month of unpaid labor if she failed. All eyes turned to him. This was no longer about her. This was about whether he would retreat. And men like Victor Harrington didn't retreat in public. He agreed, extending his hand with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. The deal was sealed in plain sight, under crystal lights and judging stares. Naomi shook his hand firmly, without triumph, without fear. What no one noticed was that the balance of power in the room had already shifted. The man who believed he was orchestrating humiliation had just accepted a challenge he didn't understand, and the woman he thought he controlled had calmly doubled down, knowing exactly what she was doing. Naomi took a slow breath, the kind that settles the body and sharpens the mind. Then she began to speak. The first words left her lips in Mandarin so precise, so controlled, that the effect was immediate and undeniable. This wasn't casual fluency. This was academic Mandarin, measured and elegant, every tone placed with intention. The sound of it cut through the room, commanding attention without asking for it. Even those who didn't understand a single word felt it. The rhythm, the authority, the quiet certainty of someone who knew exactly where she stood. She introduced the first dish as if addressing a room of scholars rather than diners, explaining its regional origins, its historical evolution, the philosophy behind its balance of flavors. She spoke of heat and numbness not as sensations, but as dialogue, as a centuries-old conversation between spice and restraint. Her voice never rushed, never faltered, each sentence built on the last, turning food into culture, technique into identity. One of the investors leaned forward without realizing it. Another stopped pretending to smile. The room had shifted from spectacle to witness. Victor blinked, confused, trying to keep up. His confidence began to erode in small, visible cracks. He interrupted once, laughing nervously, asking if this was real Chinese. He didn't receive an answer. Naomi continued, unbroken, describing preparation methods with technical accuracy that left no room for doubt. This wasn't memorization. This was mastery, the kind earned through years of immersion and failure and refinement. Then she changed languages. Without warning, without hesitation, she transitioned into Cantonese, her accent clean, authentic, unmistakable. The effect was electric. A sharp intake of breath echoed from the table. Cantonese carried a different cadence, a different cultural weight, and Naomi navigated it effortlessly. explaining how the same dish transformed across regions, how history shaped presentation, how language carried memory. One of the investors murmured under his breath, stunned. Perfect Cantonese, not studied, lived. Victor's face drained of color. He looked around as if searching for reassurance, for laughter, for someone to tell him this was a trick. No one did. His hands tightened around the edge of the table. The man who had arrived certain of dominance was now visibly unraveling, layer by layer. The room that once fed his arrogance now amplified his fear. Finally, he demanded to know who she was. Naomi paused. The silence stretched, thick and reverent. When she spoke again, it was in English, calm and devastating. She told them her name, Dr. Naomi Carter. She listed her credentials without pride, without anger, simply as fact. A linguistics professor, a specialist in natural language processing, fluent in 9 languages, a former visiting researcher in Beijing, a published academic whose work explored how language and culture shape human understanding. She spoke of translating at international conferences, of standing between nations, of words carrying consequences far beyond a dining room. She explained why she was there, not as an apology, but as context, a mother's stroke, a system that didn't care about brilliance when tragedy intervened, a life rerouted by responsibility. Her voice never broke. It didn't need to. The truth carried its own weight. Victor tried to speak. The words came out tangled, weak. He insisted it couldn't be true, that someone like her wouldn't be standing there. Naomi met his gaze steadily and asked a simple question. Why not? The question echoed longer than any insult he had thrown that night. In that moment, the hierarchy he believed in collapsed completely. Money fell silent. Assumptions burned away. What remained was undeniable. The woman he had tried to humiliate wasn't just qualified. She was exceptional. And the room understood, almost in unison, that they were witnessing something rare, not revenge, not performance, but the quiet, overwhelming force of competence revealing itself at exactly the moment it was least expected. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was heavy, the kind of silence that settles after a truth has been spoken too clearly to ignore. One by one, the investors leaned back, no longer amused, no longer uncertain. Phones appeared quietly in hands that moments earlier had applauded Victor's arrogance. Decisions were being made without speeches, without drama. A look exchanged, a message sent, a partnership reconsidered. Whatever Victor Harrington thought this night would secure for him was dissolving in real time. Someone finally spoke, not loudly, not angrily, but with unmistakable finality. This wasn't acceptable, not the behavior, not the judgment, not the man. The words landed with more force than any insult. Victor tried to recover, forcing a laugh that collapsed halfway through his throat. He protested, called it a misunderstanding, a joke taken too far. No one laughed. The room had moved on without him. Naomi stood where she had been standing all along. She didn't interrupt. She didn't demand anything. She simply waited. And that, more than anything, exposed how completely the power dynamic had reversed. The man who had controlled the room now struggled to keep his voice steady. The woman he had tried to break didn't need to raise hers at all. When the money finally came, it didn't arrive with spectacle. Victor counted the bills slowly, hands trembling, each one placed on the table like an admission. The sound of paper against wood felt louder than his earlier bravado. Naomi watched without satisfaction. There was no smile, no triumph, just calm. When she spoke again, it wasn't to gloat, it was to correct. She asked him to apologize, not to her, but to everyone who had ever been diminished by his assumptions. The request was simple. The weight behind it was not. Victor hesitated, eyes darting around the room, searching for escape, for sympathy, for anything familiar. He found none, and so he did it. The apology came out strained, stripped of confidence, audible to every corner of the room. A powerful man reduced not by force, but by exposure. Naomi accepted it with a nod. Nothing more. She gathered the money, not as a trophy, but as closure. The humiliation that had been designed for her had landed where it belonged. And as the room slowly exhaled, what lingered wasn't revenge. It was something far more unsettling and far more just. The undeniable presence of dignity, standing tall, untouched, long after arrogance had collapsed under its own weight. 6 months later, the noise of that night had faded, but its consequences had not. Naomi Carter now sat in a glass office high above the city, not as a guest, not as a survivor, but as a leader. Her name had returned to conference halls and academic panels, this time spoken with even greater respect. She had stepped into a role shaping global communication, guiding institutions that understood the value of cultural intelligence. Not because she demanded recognition, but because competence, once revealed, has a way of finding its place again. Her mother received the care she had always needed. The fear that once lived in every quiet moment slowly loosened its grip. Life didn't magically become easy, but it became stable, dignified, and whole. The struggle that had nearly erased Naomi became the foundation of her strength. She had not reclaimed her life by erasing the past, but by carrying it with her and rising anyway. Victor Harrington's story moved in the opposite direction. The video of that night spread faster than anyone expected. Deals evaporated. Investors walked away. The man who believed money made him untouchable discovered how fragile reputation truly is. Power, it turned out, could vanish as quickly as it had been abused. His fall wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, relentless, and final. Naomi never celebrated his collapse. She didn't need to. Her victory wasn't in watching someone else lose. It was in building something so solid that prejudice could no longer reach her. She proved that intelligence does not announce itself with arrogance, and dignity does not require permission. The greatest revenge is not destruction. It is becoming a version of yourself that small minds can no longer define. If this story stayed with you, take a moment to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. Because stories like this remind us that greatness is not given, it is revealed.